العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد اللهم صل ببارك وعلى إشارة إشارة رزق دار ولا دبر وجعل لك بنبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم مستقر وقرار برحمته صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد.
One loud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى نحمده ونستعينه ونثني عليه ونؤمن به ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف بريته ومبلغ رسالاته العبد المؤيد الرسول المسدد المحمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد ومحمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. We begin this first Friday khutbah by reminding all of you and myself to maintain the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We reached verses 16 onwards of Surah Qaf. Of course, usually we do in the first khutbah our discussion on the topic of the book of 40 hadith. This week, inshallah, we'll move the tafsir to the first khutbah. In the second khutbah, inshallah, I'll touch on the events that are unfolding, particularly on college campuses throughout the country. So inshallah, I'll do the tafsir in the first khutbah, and inshallah, we'll get to that in the second khutbah. Verse 16 of Surah Qaf said, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانِ Certainly we created the human being, وَنَعْلَمُ مَا تُوَسْوِسُ بِهِ نَفْسُهُ And we have knowledge of that which crosses his mind. This is, Mufassirin say, a terminology from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show that He has full knowledge of the human being. There is nothing more delicate, there is nothing more subtle than the thoughts that cross our minds. If you want to think about anything that relates to the human being, that is the most subtle, the most insignificant from one angle, what comes to mind is the thoughts that just cross the mind and they pass by. Sometimes you're sitting there thinking, well, this person's a good person, that person's a bad person. I should do this good thing, I should do that bad thing. These are wasawis. These are whispers. And normally these are wasawis that come from shaitan. The Quran here is referring to those thoughts that come to our mind. Hence it refers to waswasa coming from the human being himself. وَنَعْلَمُ مَا تُوَسْوِسُ بِهِ نَفْسُهُ We know those things that his nafs does waswasa of. Okay, these are the most subtle things that come to my mind. If anyone knows this waswasa that's happening in my mind, then he has full knowledge of me. This is why the magic that's normally done on the streets, different places, is so powerful. Because if someone comes up to you and lets you know what you were thinking of in your mind, yes, this is impossible. How could this person possibly know what I'm thinking? Because it's the most subtle thing that could possibly be there. وَنَعْلَمُ مَا تُوَسْوِسُ بِهِ نَفْسُهُ And then the Quran changed its terminology to share a different type of knowledge. It's one thing to say, whatever comes to your mind, I know. Whatever crosses your mind, I know. Then the Quran gives a more physical understanding of this knowledge. وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ We know and we are closer to Him than the jugular vein. So these are two different types of knowledge. It is knowledge as it relates to those things that are not physical. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, we know every thought that crosses His mind. Knowledge as it relates to those things that have to do with his physique and his physical aspect. وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. Then the Quran moved to a third type of knowledge. The Quran said, إِذْ يَتَلَقَّى الْمُتَلَقِّيَانِ. And then, beyond this knowledge that we have directly of him, there are two angels, there are two mutalaqis. Talaqi means to receive. There are two receivers, there's two radars. يَتَلَقِّيَانِ عَنِ الْيَمِينِ وَعَنِ الشِّمَالِ قَعِيدٍ. They're sitting on his right and his left side. Everything that he does, they are witnessing. But then the Quran goes into verse 18. Verse 18 takes it a step further. It says, we know everything that they're doing. But verse 18 specifically now starts to speak about everything that they say. This is a very interesting detail that the Quran is adding. So the Quran first and foremost comes and says, listen, everything with regards to you I have knowledge of. But then there's something special, good way or bad way, about those things that the human being says with his tongue. So verse 18 comes and says, not only do I know everything that you do, I specifically know those things that you say. This is the emphasis on the Quran, from the Quran on what? On the words that you use, the interactions that you have with other people, the way you speak of different events. So the Quran said, إِذْ يَتَلَقَّى الْمُتَلَقِّيَانِ عَنِ الْيَمِينِ وَعَنِ الشِّمَالِ قَعِيدٍ. When the two angels are sitting there, on the right side and the left side, they're taking in this information. It should say everything that he does, we have knowledge of. It should say everything that they do, there is raqibun wa atid. There are angels, they are prepared, and there are waiting. Raqib means what? The one who's waiting. He's doing muraqabah, as they say. Atid means what? The one who is prepared. It should be saying everything you do, but that's not what the verse says. The verse then speaks specifically of those things that you say. The verse said what? We have full knowledge of him, and everything that he says, there is what for it? Raqibun atid. Someone's writing it down. What's the Quran trying to say here? The Quran is trying to say out of everything you do, I'm putting that on one side, on one hand. On the other hand, there are things you say. مَا يَلْفِظُ مِنْ قَوْلٍ. There's nothing that he throws out there. Lafza means word. In today's contemporary Arabic, it means word. The reason why they call a word is because it's a sound you throw out there. It's a word you throw out there. When you throw it out there, it has consequences. Yes? It has an impact in the real world. The Quran said we have knowledge of everything that he does, and then everything he says, there are angels watching him. Why? Because the things that the human being says in his life, sometimes their impact is so much greater than the things that he does. There are things he can do, and then there are things that he can say. And those things that he says, good or bad, can have an unbelievable impact. This is the power of social media, by the way. Social media is this. What is social media? Social media is nothing. It's a bunch of words in a cloud somewhere. That's what it is. But look at the impact that it has in the world. That's why the Quran says in other verses of the Quran, وَتَحْسَبُونَهُ هَيِّنًا. When it comes to the accusation you make with your tongue, you assume it's something small. Hayyin, and nothing too serious. وَهُوَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَظِيمٌ. But it's great in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's very big. It's very remarkable. It's very consequential. It's very significant. So the Quran said, out of everything that you do, specifically the things that you say, we are constantly watching. So what are the things that we say? Are they positive? Are they negative? Sometimes one comment, yes, breaks a heart. Sometimes one comment brings pain to the heart of another person. Sometimes one comment can make the day of another person. Just depends how the human being uses his tongue. This is why the narration in Al-Kafi says from the 6th Imam, Al-Imam As-Sadiq, Salawatullahi Wassalamu alayhi. The narration says what? It says every morning, every organ of the body greets one another. And they all greet one another and they greet the tongue. Except when it comes to the tongue, they say, listen, if you let us live peacefully today, we will live peacefully. If you mess up things, we will be punished. إِنَّمَا نُثَابُ وَنُعَاقَبُ بِكَ. We'll either be rewarded because of you, or we will be what? Punished because of you. Why? Because depending on what you do today, you can change the fate of all of us. This is the power of the tongue. So the Quran came and said, مَا يَلْفِظُ مِنْ قَوْلٍ. Every little word that he throws out there. You know, we say these words and we assume it just vanishes into thin air. No, every word that you throw out there is someone who's doing talaqi of it. There's someone who's receiving it. He's copying it. He's writing it down. Okay, this human being, if he realizes this, wonderful. If he doesn't, then the time of his death comes. وَجَاءَتْ سَكْرَةُ الْمَوْتِ بِالْحَقِّ. These are realities only the Quran will tell you about, by the way. وَجَاءَتْ سَكْرَةُ الْمَوْتِ بِالْحَقِّ. The intoxication of death comes around. ذَلِكَ مَا كُنْتَ مِنْهُ تَحِيدٌ. This is that thing you were constantly worried about. So what is the Quran speaking of here? Quran is saying this human being knew that when the time of his death comes, it's going to be a very difficult transition for him. It's going to be a difficult move from one world to the next world. But what did he do? Constantly swept it under the rug. Constantly said, don't worry about it. Whenever it comes, I'll worry about it. It's not a big deal. Busy with day-to-day life. Now the Quran says, وَجَاءَتْ. Now the difficulties of death have now come. Meaning the moment of his death has now come. Why does the Quran refer to it as sakra? Because these moments are so difficult. It's as if this person has lost it. It's as if this person has been intoxicated. Yes? When you see someone who's intoxicated, what happens? It seems as though their intellectual faculties are not functioning properly. Yes? He says things, he walks, he talks, he might be hallucinating, whatever the case might be. The Quran says when the time of death comes, that's what death looks like. The difficulties are so severe, the human being, it's almost as if he loses it. It's almost as if he's not functioning normally anymore. Hence, these difficulties as a whole, this whole package has been given the title what? Sakratul Maut. That intoxication that the human being feels. Why? Because it's an out-of-body experience for him. He almost cannot digest it. Because of that, it seems as though he's lost it. It's too difficult for him. ذَلِكَ مَا كُنْتَ مِنْهُ تَحِيدٌ. This is that thing that you constantly were worried about. This is why the narration, Shaykh al-Saduq has narrated this from the first Imam, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, Muhammad wa Muhammad. He said there are three moments that are the most difficult for the human being. The moments that the human being has to deal with death. That moment is very extremely difficult for him. The second of those moments is when he is risen from the grave. And the Quran speaks about this. Those moments that the human being is risen from the grave. All of those things that he was told are going to be true, now he's witnessing with his own eyes. This is difficult to digest for him. For the believer, it's difficult to digest to a certain extent. For the disbeliever, it is that much more difficult to digest. It's a spectrum. Depending on how strong his faith was, for some it's very difficult to digest. For some other people, they can digest it. It's still becoming a reality for them. For you and I, we might fall under that category. We believed in it, but still it wasn't like a reality for us. Yes. He said three moments. Moment he is going to be dealing with death, number one. Number two, the moment he is risen from the grave. Number three, the moment where he stands in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He quote unquote meets Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes? These three moments, he says, these are the difficult moments. Why is this moment of death so difficult? In another narration, the sixth Imam said, he said this moment is difficult because his body and his soul were used to this world. They had grown up together in this world. Now they're telling him, you have to leave behind this body. Your soul has to go somewhere else. This is a difficult transition. Especially if his faith is either non-existent or his faith is weak. To the extent that the akhirah was not a reality for him, when they tell him you have to go, it's like they're trying to kill him. You understand? Because he didn't believe in any other world. Now they're telling him you have to move in that direction. It's almost like they're telling him to go ahead and perish. It's almost like they're telling him to vanish into thin air. It's painful for him. The believer, however, because he has a reality that he believed in, and that belief was based on how much he acted on it, by the way. Not just, oh, I heard this lecture, it says akhirah is a real thing, so now it's a real thing. No. Based on how much your action was showing, you believed in it. to the extent that he had a belief in that day, then this transition becomes a little bit easier for him because he's moving towards a reality that he's already familiar with. He already knows what that world is all about. Already knows doesn't mean he just gained the knowledge of it. It already knows means he lived that reality. When he said no to a sin, when no one else was watching, that means he already believed in a different realm. You understand? He already believed that this day was going to come. Otherwise, why is he restricting himself from pleasures that others are indulging in? Why is he putting himself through effort when others are relaxing? It's because he believes in a different world. To the extent that he believes, this sakratul maut can become easy or more difficult for them. Okay, this sakratul maut, the first Imam, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, sallallahu Muhammad wa Muhammad. He has beautiful lines. I'll touch on some of these lines this week, and inshallah the other lines we'll leave for the following. This is khutbah 109 of Nahjul Balagha. He's describing what happens to the human being at the time of Sakratul Maut. Now, Sakratul Maut, the difficulties surrounding death, as I mentioned, is going to be difficult for anybody and everybody. But for some, it's difficult as a punishment. For some, no, it's difficult because it's simply a transition. Because it's a transition, it's part of the purification of his sins, just like the child who's being born into this world. When a child is being born into this world, is it because God is trying to punish this child? No, the child goes from inside the womb into this place that's extremely cold. That's why the baby is constantly crying. So you guys brought me here. I'm not used to this world. What is this world anyways? Christ. Transition is difficult either way, yes? This seems to be the case with Sakratul Maut. It's going to be difficult for everybody, less difficult for a believer, and not so much as a punishment, but more of a purification for him. Same way the child comes into this world, it's difficult for him, not because the child is being punished, but because it's part of his growth. He will benefit from this pain that he is going through. Okay, the first Imam is going to describe for us what this Sakratul Maut looks like. Now, I want to emphasize, this Sakratul Maut, the Quran or the Hadith is going to explain to us how difficult of a transition it is regardless. But imagine how difficult and painful it is if someone disbelieves or someone believes but his actions aren't there. Then this becomes very difficult for him. It's a difficult transition in and of itself to a certain extent, yes? But it's still tolerable when this person has done the right things. When he hasn't done the right things, the regret that he has in his heart and the sadness he has in him is too much to bear. So what does he say? He said, فَغَيْرُ مَوْصُوفٍ مَا نَزَلَ بِهِمْ. I cannot describe for you what took place for them. I mean, these are scary lines for you and I. Yes? Even scarier for the one who doesn't prepare. Inshallah, for you and I, we prepare. So that scariness is limited to the normal, transitionally difficultness that it has. Yes? But he said, فَغَيْرُ مَوْصُوفٍ مَا نَزَلَ بِهِمْ. How can I describe for you what happened to them, to those who were dying? اجتمعت عليهم سكرة الموت وحسرة الفوت. You know what they were dealing with in those moments? They were dealing with sakratul maut. They were dealing with the intoxication, the heaviness of leaving this world on one hand, وحسرة الفوت. And then what added to their pain is the regret that they carried in their hearts. The regret of the opportunities that they gave up. The regret of all of those chances they had to align their life in the right direction. But he decided to just carry on with his normal day-to-day life. He didn't decide to prioritize those things that matter. Hasratul Faut. Faut means something that's lost. It's non-existent anymore, yes? Hasratul Faut means he has regret of all of those chances that I had. Okay. He says what makes that moment difficult for them is not just the difficulties of death. وَحَسْرَةُ الْفَوْتِ. I don't know if you've seen sometimes when you get sick, if you don't have anything to worry about, your job, a test, so on and so forth, all you're dealing with is a difficulty of just being sick. There are other times you deal with the difficulty of being sick and you're constantly worried. And in the back of your mind, there are other concerns. And you're thinking, what's going to happen to my job? And you're thinking, what's going to happen to my family? This is the situation they're going through. اجتمعت عليهم سكرة الموت وحسرة الفوت ففترت لهم أطرافهم وتغيرت لها ألوانهم. The color of their skin starts to change. They start to go pale. ثُمَّ ازْدَادَ الْمَوْتُ فِيهِمْ وُلُوجًا. Then death starts to penetrate them further, meaning enter into them further. In other words, it's going now to the next step. The first step is the appearance of this person begins to change. The Quran says, the Hadith says, now what happens? Death is going to take it a step further. What happens then? فَحِيلَ بَيْنَ أَحَدِهِمْ وَبَيْنَ مَنْتِقِهِ. Now all of a sudden, he tries to communicate with people and he cannot communicate with people anymore. He tries to speak with people, but he cannot speak anymore. Not as a punishment. This is just the natural stages of death coming. He's going to leave this world. Okay, the natural functions of this world are going to come to an end now. فَحِيلَ بَيْنَ أَحَدِهِمْ وَبَيْنَ مَنْتِقِهِ. So he can't speak anymore, but the difficulty comes from where? وَإِنَّهُ لَبَيْنُ أَهْلِهِ. But he's amongst his family. So he's lying there. Uncle is here, cousin is here, brother is here, sister is here. All of them are around him. But as much as he wants to speak to them, that opportunity has now been cut off. وَإِنَّهُ لَبَيْنُ أَهْلِهِ يَنْظُرُ بِبَصَرِهِ. He sees with his eyes. وَيَسْمَعُ بِأُذُنِهِ. He still hears them. He can still see them. عَلَى صِحَّةٍ مِّنْ عَقْلِهِ. His mind is working fine. وَبَقَاءٍ مِّن لُبِّهِ. He understands everything, except he can't communicate with them anymore. So the communication has now been cut off from his end. Okay, when this is happening, he still hears them speaking. This one says, oh, go tell the nurse to come. This one tells, oh, get the doctor, get him his water. This is happening. Maybe they're looking at the machines going up and down. So at these moments, these are the moments, yes? He sees all of this, but he can't communicate with them. So what is he doing in those moments? يُفَكِّرُ فِيمَ أَفْنَى عُمْرَهُ. This whole time, everyone else is struggling around him. You know what he's thinking about? He's thinking, what did I spend my whole life on? يُفَكِّرُ فِيمَ أَفْنَى عُمْرَهُ. What did I waste my whole life on? What did I dedicate my whole life to? Did I dedicate it to the right things? Did I have the right priorities in mind? وَفِيمَ أَذْهَبَ دَهْرَهُ. What did he dedicate his whole lifetime to? وَيَتَذَكَّرُ أَمْوَالًا جَمَعَهَا. And he thinks of the wealth that he gathered. Except when he was gathering that wealth, أَغْمَدَ فِي مَطَالِبِهَا. He kind of turned a blind eye in terms of where he was getting the money from. So his approach was, get the money regardless of how you get it. Doesn't matter where you get it from, how you get it from, halal, haram, doesn't matter. Just grab this money. وَأَخَذَ مِن مُصَرَّحَاتِهَا مُتَشَابِهَاتِهَا. Those things that the religion had considered haram for him, he had said it's not a problem. As long as it's money, قَدْ أَغْمَدَ. He had turned a blind eye. Doesn't matter. Just make it happen. So here's the problem now. قَدْ لَزِمَتْهُ تَبِعَاتُ جَامِعَهَا وَأَشْرَفَ عَلَى فِرَاقِهَا. Now he's gathered this wealth. Now he has to deal with the consequences of that. The consequences don't leave him, but the wealth itself is leaving him. The wealth is leaving him. It's gone. But the problem is, even if he gives up that wealth right now, the consequences are not going to be given up. The consequences are going to stay. This is very difficult dichotomy, a very difficult situation to be in. تَبْقَى لِمَنْ وَرَاءَهُ يُنَعَّمُونَ. So what happens? He was the one who went through all this trouble. He gathered this wealth. He gathered it from the wrong places. Sometimes the gathering was not the problem, where he had to spend it, he didn't spend it. Yes, sometimes that's the problem. But here's the result of it all. At the end of the day, he's sitting on this big pot of gold, except he has to deal with the consequences of it. And guess where that wealth is going? That wealth is not going to him anymore. It's going to others who will come and benefit from him. As the narrations say, he came and he gathered money for others. يُنَعَّمُونَ فَيَكُونُ الْمَهْنَأُ لِغَيْرِهِ وَلَعِبُ عَلَى ظَهْرِهِ. The benefit is for others, and the weight and the difficulty is on his shoulders. And this is, you lose on both sides, a lose-lose type of situation. وَالْمَرْءُ قَدْ غُلِقَتْ رُهُونُهَا بِهَا فَهُوَ يَعُضُّ يَدَهُ نَدَامَةً. He bites his finger out of regrets of what he did. Yes, this is a terminology the Quran uses a lot. That those who have regret, they do what? يَعُضُّ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ. He bites on his finger, meaning he regrets what he has done. The narration continues what he thinks there, and then the second level or the second stage of death comes. And what happens to this body in those situations? We will leave that inshallah for the following khutbah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. اللهم صل بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين أثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا ثم أصلي وأسلم على نجيبه وجليله وحافظ سره الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأراضين بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. اللهم صل وسلم على علي أمير المؤمنين وفاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين وعلى سبطي نبي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في أرضك. صلوات. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. We begin this second Friday khutbah by reminding all of you and myself to maintain taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Normally in this khutbah we will be doing tafsir of the surah of the Quran, but of course as I was flying back into the States yesterday, and over the past maybe week or so, 5 or 6 days, there was constantly news of what was taking place on college campuses, and therefore I thought it would be very appropriate to take some time to address these events that are taking place. As we speak right now, there are on at least 40 campuses across the United States protests happening with regards to the issue of Israel and Palestine. First and foremost, this is unprecedented on the issue of Palestine. The idea of protests on college campuses is something that's been around has been around for a very long time, of course. The Vietnam War, we saw this happen. When you read, of course, South Africa, apartheid, same thing has happened, and I'll touch on that very briefly. So this is something that's been around for a long time. On the issue of Palestine, this is unprecedented. We've never had such an issue. I remember 25 years ago, we used to go to protests. Yes, we used to drive actually 6 hours, 7 hours to get to a protest. And I remember we would show up and there was a crowd, but Palestine was an unknown issue. It wasn't even a thing. People would come and speak to you and say, like, what are you guys protesting about anyways? Oh, there's a people, their land has been taken, this, that. I say, we don't understand. What is this you're referring to? We are seeing unprecedented events take place, brothers and sisters. Students coming on college campuses, they are risking a lot of things. For one thing, they're definitely risking arrest, but it's because their conscience can't take it anymore. And which human being's conscience can take this? Who else can sit there and watch what's happening? It's unbelievable, unbelievable. This past 6 or 7 months, I'm forgetting how many days, I think it's been 200 days now, has been unprecedented. For me personally, it's been unprecedented. And you can, in some ways, divide life to before these events took place and after these events took place. Why? Because we always hear about genocides in history books. We always hear about these things happening, but you never see it happening. These are tales from books of history normally that we hear about. And then we sit back and say, what could possibly push someone to do this? How could someone possibly be okay with it? Certainly when it's happening, it's clear to everybody that this is a terrible thing that's happening. And most genocides, when they're happening, it doesn't seem like a wrong thing to most people. Only in hindsight, after thousands of people have been killed, then people sit back and say, oh, you know what? Actually, this was a bad thing. In this country, the president of, or the ex-president of South Africa, yes, Nelson Mandela, he was on a watch list until very recently, yes. Now the idea is he's a hero. How did that happen? Well, a lot of it was because of these types of events. This is unprecedented. Where has this started from? Of course, this is started from Columbia University. They were the first to start these protests, and that kind of sparked a national protest that happened on all of these college campuses. And what are they asking for? I mean, it's quite funny, the level of commitment that our politicians have to a foreign entity. All they're asking is divestment. All they're asking is that this genocide that's happening, let's not be a part of it. Let's at least stop our own university from being a part of it. They're not asking for anything more. And then you see the chaos and the way it has wreaked havoc. Should it wreak havoc? No. Should it create this much chaos? No. It's a very simple thing. If there's something terrible happening, I don't want to be a part of it, and I don't want my student body to be a part of it, and I want my college to be a part of it. It should be a very understandable thing. But then you see, no, it's not understandable. It seems as though all of those promises of Western civilization on freedom of speech and all, somehow, some way, it all ends here. Now, everything else, okay, you can get your way, you can get away with it, so on. But this one seems like a big red line. And that indicates to you and I, on a political level, the role that this entity plays in the Middle East. What role does it play? And what does it do? And what does it mean to this country and certain other European countries that they're willing to go this far in committing to it? So, what does that mean? That means if this entity now attacks hospitals, it's not a problem. We have to stay committed to it. If it attacks schools, not a problem. Women and children, not a problem. Food and water is cut off, not a problem. Journalists are killed, not a problem. Taking people's homes away, and this is basic news, everybody knows this at this point, yes? Taking homes away in the West Bank, not a problem. Illegal settlements, based on every single law that you can find in this world, not a problem. We have to stay committed. Administrative detention, arrest Palestinians without even a cause, and then 10 years from now, we'll see if we'll charge them. Not a problem. All of these happening, have to stay committed to it. What is this? Yes, Naomi Klein, she's a very well-known author. She's a best-selling author. Yes, she has a new book out. It's called Doppelganger, on this issue of Israel and Palestine. She said something in one of the protests. It was very beautiful. She said, I used to read the Bible. Yes, and she comes from a Jewish background. So I used to read the Bible and how the Bible spoke to the Israelites when Musa alayhi salam came down. Moses came down from the mountain and saw they're worshiping a golden calf. Yes, and I'm quoting what she's saying. She said when he saw that they're worshiping this golden calf, Musa alayhi salam, he objected. And she said, I also used to read this passage and think to myself, what is the Bible trying to tell us? And though it has other interpretations, she said one of them is that sometimes an entity will become like that golden calf for people. No matter what it is, we have to worship it. And in her words, she said this Zionist entity has now become that golden calf for many people. Doesn't matter. And today, we are hearing today and yesterday, mass graves being found near hospitals and other details that I don't want to even go into. But this has now become the golden calf. This has become the thing that every a sentiment of free speech and freedom and liberty ends here. Doesn't go beyond this issue. Now, why is this issue creating so much chaos? Well, because in the 80s, there was a very similar movement, started actually in Columbia University. Yes? 7 students, they started their protest outside of one of the administrative buildings of Columbia University. It continued for a couple weeks. There was constant back and forth. There were protests on college campuses until around October 8th. So how many months is that? Maybe 6 or so months. Until what happened? Eventually, the university decided to divest from those companies that have invested in what? South Africa apartheid. This is why this is such a serious issue. Same issue happened on the Vietnam War. On the Vietnam War, same issue happened, and then you find the foreign, the minister of our foreign policy minister, who came out later and he said the reason why we couldn't get the job done when it came to Vietnam was because internally we were divided. What does he mean internally divided? Who's divided? Were the politicians internally divided? No. It's because people's conscience was waking up to this idea. And this is what we see with the issue of Palestine. The issue has now reached a point, the oppression has now reached a point where now people of all backgrounds, they can't take it anymore. And how could they? And how can you and I take this? It's too much. It's too much. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it such that one day we see people who are oppressed, for them to be free and them to be liberated and them to be dealt with as human beings, not subpar, not buried in mass graves, many of which with hands tied, and then waste thrown on the bodies, and then this and that. And this is what happens after you're dead. God knows what happens before you're dead. And the news that you hear and the footage that you see and the news that comes out of that part of the world is one of the most heart-wrenching things you've ever heard of and seen. It's difficult for us. It's very difficult for us to even witness and hear of what is happening. But hopefully, inshallah, this becomes a step to a time where these brothers and sisters, regardless of their background, Muslim, I don't know, Christian, there might be atheist, doesn't matter. This type of treatment is not, nobody is worthy of this type of treatment. Animals aren't worthy of this type of treatment, let alone human beings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He frees them from their difficulty and their pain, inshallah. And those of us who can shed light on this, those of us who can be a part of this, whether it's on social media or any legal way to do so, we need to do so as well. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرج واستغفر ربي واتوب. اللهم صل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. صلى الله عليه وسلم. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. وأن عليا حجة الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا بئس مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآيات الله والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. قل يا أيها الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين. قل إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون. وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا إله إلا الله العظيم الحليم. لا إله إلا الله رب العرش الكريم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والغنيمة من كل بر والسلامة من كل إثم. اللهم لا تغفر ذنبا إلا غفرته، ولا هما إلا فرجته، ولا سقما إلا شفيته، ولا عيبا إلا سترته، ولا رزقا إلا بسطته، ولا خوفا إلا آمنته، ولا سوءا إلا صرفته، ولا حاجة هي لك رضا ولي فيها صلاح إلا قضيتها يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وأن عليا حجة الله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب. صلاة العصر. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقوم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وتقبل شفاعته وارفع درجته. بحول الله وقوته أقوم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقوم. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. لا إله الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ما شاء الله لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Inshallah, recite Dua Wahadat all together. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا إله إلا الله إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون. لا إله إلا الله ولا نعبد إلا إياه مخلصين له الدين ولو كره المشركون. لا إله إلا الله ربنا ورب آبائنا الأولين. لا إله إلا الله وحده وحده أنجز وعده ونصر عبده وعز جنده وهزم الأحزاب وحده. فله الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت ويميت ويحيي وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير. صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين. السلام على 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.